It's one of the reasons FPA specializes in the investment advisor, CPA, and manufacturer and distributor vertical markets. He's very active in this industry. He speaks at industry events and has had a number of articles published. And Scott Harrington is a client relationship executive at FPA. Before he came to FPA, Scott owned his own IT consulting firm in San Diego. He was a project manager for FPA, so he's worked directly with clients in actually managing their IT. Just a little bit about FPA. So we've been in business for over 21 years and have about 25 employees. Now at FPA, they're all full-time staff. We really don't outsource anything to third parties. We have our own dedicated network operations center where we run our clients' networks from. And one of our sayings here is business before technology. Now to us this means we focus on business aspects and the value proposition technology brings to our client businesses. It's not about technology for technology's sake. Another thing we like to point out is that you'll see a lot of companies talk about core values, and a lot of them just seem pretty, well, run-of-the-mill. We've seen words like integrity, honesty, fast. Well, at FPA, ours are a little bit different, and we really believe in our core values. The primary one is simple: take care of the client. We believe if we're doing this, everything else will fall in place. And lastly, we focus on your IT so you can focus on your business. We work with a number of different clients in the greater LA area. Some of them have been with us for well, as long as 21 years when we opened our doors. And just want to point out, beyond our technical expertise, systems and processes, and the how we do what we do, we believe our ability to develop long-term and meaningful relationships with our clients makes all the difference when it comes to our client success with technology. So now let me turn this over to Craig to get us going.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'll try to live up to that high praise you gave me earlier. So let's start off with what the purpose of this webinar is, what we hope to be able to provide to you, and what you learned today. So first off, really the three core concepts that we want to cover is the differences between backup, disaster recovery, and business continuity. They're three different things. They all relate to each other, and oftentimes you hear them used interchangeably, and they're really not. So we're going to go through what the differences are between all of those. We're going to talk about the types of disasters, their frequencies and severity. We're going to talk about why you should be afraid, very afraid. And what we mean by that is if you don't have the right things in place, it's going to come back to bite you. It's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of statistics and probability. And from our experience and the number of clients that we manage, always something manages to rear its ugly head at the most inopportune time. So those are some of the key things. What's the easiest way to ensure your data is fully protected? How to put your backup on autopilot, and how to ensure that you're fully operational after any disaster. And if you notice, any is underlined. That's a pretty important point. And we'll come back to that. But this is what we're hoping the takeaways are for all of you after this webinar, is that we've shared some important information, key information, and information that's at a high enough level that it has some significant value for you and not just talking points. So why is this so important? Well, you know, you can go out there on the internet and you can find all sorts of statistics, and we did. But, you know, this is a little bit conservative compared to some of the statistics that we've seen out there. I mean, we've seen numbers close to 80% of businesses that never open after a major loss of data. So, you know, we kind of toned it down a little bit and found from the FPA 25 to 43% of businesses will never reopen. 51% closed within 2 years of the loss, and a mere 6% survived over the long term. So being impacted by a catastrophic disaster, and that can be anything from a server crash with a bad backup to, hey, the building fell down in an earthquake and we're red tagged and we're just done. How do we start over with all our paper? That's the only backup that we have for things. So it can run the gamut, but this is really why it's so important. And so the goal today is threefold. Simply to ensure you're never going to lose any critical information, to minimize the downtime if something should happen, and to enable you to recover as quickly as possible in the event of a disaster. So at this point, I really want to drill down as to and define what the difference is between backup, disaster recovery, and business continuity. Again, those are the three high-level topics that we want to cover and make sure that we have clarity around. But first, I want to take a quick little poll and get some information from you guys and see where we stand out there as far as business continuity and backup and whatnot. So the first question that we're going to ask you right now is, which best describes your understanding of your current backup situation? So if you can, take a minute or two and update this information and let us know where you stand on this. Okay, we're at 22%. We need to wake up some people who are working on email and doing other things at the same time. Getting higher, 67%. All right, getting close. I feel like the music from Jeopardy should be playing right now. I won't sing, so that would be a bad thing. All right, we'll give it a few more seconds. Maybe we could whistle. We need that music. Okay, well, at this point, we're going to close the poll. Everybody there? Everybody voted? We're good? So here we go. I'm closing the poll now. Okay, so here's what people on the line right now are saying. 46% know for a fact everything is backed up and restores work. 31% everybody's pretty sure everything's backed up, but they don't know for sure. And 23% say my IT guy says everything's backed up, so it must be. So I'm hoping that 23% is existing clients of ours, and we know for sure that it's backed up. Otherwise, that might be a little iffy. So let's keep moving along on this point. So again, the three concepts that we wanted to talk about were backup, disaster recovery, and business continuity. Okay, well, somebody actually raised their hand, and we got a question, and the first question was, yes, they're referring to us. We're the IT guys who told them that everything's being backed up. So we'll regroup with you and make sure we're on the same page about that. So anyway, so the foundation, obviously, is backup. Everything comes off of that. Obviously, you can't have business continuity or disaster recovery without a solid backup in place. So the backup is the first layer. Disaster recovery is the second layer. Again, you can't really recover unless you have a solid backup. And business continuity is the overarching concept on top of the two. So the thing to think about, though, is that while backup and disaster recovery are really tactics, they're kind of the methodology and the how of what's going on, whereas business continuity is more of a strategy. And so backup and disaster recovery, those are kind of the nuts and bolts of how you do what you do to make sure that your business can operate, and you can have a business continuity plan, and you can ensure that what's going on when a disaster hits. But it's really the strategy that the other two fall under. So the place to start when thinking about these things, and we tend to think, depending on where we're coming from, either we're thinking from the bottom up, back up, and at a bare minimum, we need to get this in place, we need to get this running, you need to have this safety net in place. Or knowing what we know about a client and what's going on and what their level of backup is and their disaster recovery capabilities are, we might come from a top-down approach and provide a business continuity approach, and how will you actually run at that time of a critical event. So there's different ways to approach it, but they all three go together. Usually the starting point when thinking about any of this is understanding your risks. And there's many different types of risks that any business can be exposed to. Human errors, equipment failures, third-party failures, environmental hazards, all of these different things. And the thing is that they all have slightly different probabilities and slightly different impacts. And if you look at this chart, it's clear that going in the order that we've gone in, from human errors, equipment failures, working your way up to terrorism and sabotage, the probability goes down, but the impact goes up. So the things to think about is, how do you address this, obviously in a cost-effective way, in a value proposition way, and in a meaningful way, so that you can address as much as possible of the probability, so you can mitigate the impact as much as possible. So if you think about things, and some of the things that we've seen in the news and some of the things that we've hit, backups take care of things on the real simple side of stuff. They take care of file restores. They take care of, oh, I deleted the wrong thing, something got corrupted, blah, 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 blah. So those are kind of the basic things that backup kind of takes over. But if you think about the more catastrophic events, and that can run from equipment failures on up. Equipment failures might mean server failed, and we weren't prepared for it. Or we were prepared enough that, yeah, we had a backup, but what does that really mean? And that's the thing with backups, is it's just a tactic, it's just a piece. And a lot of people misinterpret, oh, I have a good backup, therefore I have a business continuity plan, and I'd be able to continue my business operations uninterrupted because I have a backup. Not thinking further through that, well, wait a minute, you have a backup of your data, and the backup of your data means, yeah, if your server crashed, you need to reinstall the operating system, you need to reinstall the tape software, you need to reinstall the tape drive, you need to get everything set up again, you need to get all of your infrastructure and security and Active Directory and all the things that go to running the server, and then you get to restore all your data. Well, that's not only is that a time-consuming exercise that could be 2 or 3 days of crisis response mode, but you rarely ever get things back to the way that they were. And there's always tweaking, and there's always time involved. And the next thing you know, you spent $3,000 or $4,000 to get your business back up and going, just for something that's preventable. And that's just on the equipment failure side, not preparing yourself for environmental hazards, fires, floods. I think a lot of people think of terrorism and sabotage in terms of, well, I really don't have to worry about Al-Qaeda and what terrorism means. unless it's a major catastrophe. Well, I don't know if you remember, you know, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that, where the city of San Francisco was held hostage by their network administrator because he wouldn't give up the network admin password, and their systems were locked down, and nothing could be done, and they actually threw him in jail to, you know, try to chill him out and get the password, and it didn't happen, and it took like 2 or 3 days before the mayor, Gavin Newsom, was able to talk him into releasing that password. And so, you know, that clearly comes under terrorism and sabotage, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't think about in terms of what the risk is. I see another question that somebody asked, and we actually, I think we just answered it, but is hacktivism included in sabotage? And yeah, I would say definitely. So that's what I'm talking about, where third-party people hack in, or you know, existing employees, existing staff, existing third-party IT providers. There's a lot of different opportunities for that out there in the world. So yeah, definitely that falls under that. And so while the risk may seem low, I think a lot of the time too, the risk that's out there and the risk that's perceived is minimized because a lot of companies don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about breaches. They don't want to talk about how they were affected by an outside force and how they were, you know, technically broken into, because that's just going to give them, you know, bad perception, bad press to their clients. We know of a client who, a CPA firm, who was hacked, and they got their clients' banking information, and it was close to actually doing something with the bank, but it was caught before any activity was negative activity was done. But that went to not so much the safeguards they had in place, but it was more about their approach and their policies and procedures that they had in place, and how realistic people take terrorism, sabotage, and hacktivism, for lack of a better term, and whether they take that seriously. I mean, there's a lot of clients out there that have the approach that, hey, we're small, hey, it's not that big a deal, why would anybody want to come after our data? You know, there's lots of reasons why, and a lot of times it's just to prove that they can. And the thing is the damage isn't to your business because they actually take the data and do something with it. The damage, we believe, is more in terms of what the PR and what the ultimate impact is to your business from a perception standpoint. And one of the things that I think people need to keep in mind is that there actually is a law out there in, I think it's about 20 states right now, that if you know that you've been hacked, you need to immediately notify the state, and you need to immediately notify your clients that this has happened. And so I think that and California actually is one of those states. So I think that a lot of people downplay this stuff and minimize this stuff and either say, well, it won't happen to me, or, well, it's not that big a deal. But the more and more this becomes critical, and the more and more it becomes out there and apparent in the news, and actually the more and more people get held to this level of accountability, the more this is going to be taken seriously. So I think this is a big thing that, again, a lot of people don't take seriously, but you need to have out there. And that leads into a whole other discussion about security and accessibility and all those sorts of things. But you know, today's topic is about business continuity and disaster recovery, and this is merely, you know, just threat and what the impact is of that. So the next concept that we talk about is really, you know, kind of the two main approaches when you're thinking about disaster recovery and business continuity. And I know that IT has lots of acronyms out there, and here's two more for everybody to memorize, but RTO and RPO. And RTO is simply recovery time objective, which means how long can you be down? What is, your pain tolerance, really, of how long your business can be down before it really starts impacting you? And RPO is, okay, well, thinking in terms of coming back up, how old can your data be? Can you be down for an hour and lose data from yesterday? Can you be down for an hour and lose data for the last week? What is your pain point, and how much is that worth to you? And those are really kind of the tipping point questions here that everybody who's building a business continuity plan and looking at business continuity and disaster recovery is, these are the two main questions that you need to ask and answer and balance on coming up with that solution that makes sense. So, beyond just RTO and RPO, for some companies out there and some organizations who, their answer might be, well, we can't be down at all. And a lot of times we see that where people say, well, we can't be down at all, and they just don't have the infrastructure in place to ensure that that's happening. So it's interesting when you get people who say, well, we can't be down at all, yet all we have is our data backed up. Well, okay, that means that when you are down, you're going to be down for a certain period of time. And so I think a lot of people think in terms of business continuity, or actually they think more in terms of disaster recovery and not business continuity. They think in terms of a stop and then a start period. They think that, okay, our business stopped, servers down, networks down, can't get to my building. What's that time period until things start up again? And so the concept of business continuity is either shortening that time period to something that's really acceptable to you, obviously based on what the costs are, and or kicking it up to a whole nother level of what's called real-time failover, where above and beyond having some plan and having some acceptable threshold of your recovery time objective, but having a failover concept where you're running redundant hardware, or you have things in the cloud, or you have things in place such that, hey, if one server goes down, automatically another one kicks in and you don't feel the pain and your users don't even know that anything changed. And those sorts of things take place for larger organizations where the costs are just way too large and the impact is just way too great, spread over so many staff that the productivity loss and the downtime is huge that they're willing to invest in that. Or you have certain organizations, it doesn't matter about the size, but it's about their industry and their services that they're providing. Things like companies who monitor ATMs. If an ATM runs out of cash, company stops making money. The ATM has to have cash at all times, so they need to be up at all times. Or trading systems, or manufacturers, distributors who are running 24-hour shops, and they just cannot be down for those specific reasons. Another one is the healthcare industry, where if you're running electronic medical records, you can't be down. You have a patient sitting in a room, you need to have your systems up and running. So that kind of goes to the start-stop concept and the RTO and RPO concept. And so before we move on, I'd like to take another quick little poll, and this one is going to have a little bit of a twist of what we just talked about. And this is, how long could your business operate without access to your computer systems? So as we're talking about recovery time objectives and how long your business can be down, it's a pretty important concept to have in place and understand, because that's going to drive your decision-making process in all of this. So, the options are for multiple days, no problem, we can be down. for 2 days max, for no longer than 1 day, for no longer than 1 hour, and we can't be down at all. Okay, looks like we're generating a nice bell curve here. Getting close. It's interesting what we can see through the webinar tools, how the surveys wake everybody up and they become more involved. They go from sleeping to, okay, I'll answer the question. So we'll give it a few more seconds here and see what we can come up with. I think we're pretty close. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2. Bueller? Anyone? Okay, I'm going to close it now. So what we have is, like I said, a decent sort of bell curve, but looks like the majority of people out there would be acceptable to have 1 day down. And, you know, others who are 1 hour down, some who they can't have any interruption whatsoever. So this is pretty important information. And I think, again, it goes to the concept of how long can you be down and what sort of mechanisms you should have in place to prepare for that. So, again, getting back to what the 3 key concepts are: backup, disaster recovery, business continuity. Let's talk a little bit now about the key tactic, which is backup. Because again, if you don't have the right backup solution in place, just from a mechanics standpoint, the other 2 are meaningless. Disaster recovery and business continuity can't take place. So let's talk a little bit and drill down about backup, and we'll come back to the other 2. So traditional backup methodologies. They're performed nightly. Somebody has to remove last night's media. It relies on your staff. Offsite backup is usually a 2-step process, meaning you have to do the backup, and then manually somebody has to send the tapes out, or you have a company that comes and picks up the tapes, or you take the tapes home, and those sorts of things. I'm sure everybody who has backup and takes their tapes home, I'm sure everybody takes them home every night like clockwork, and nothing gets missed. And then the thing about backups is that, for the most part, we've obviously we've been doing this for a long time, and we've been running backups for a long time, and rarely is everything getting backed up. Rarely is everything backed up. Usually you start out with the best of intentions, but then what ends up happening? You run out of space. You start cutting things off. Well, we don't need to back up that file. Well, those things haven't changed in a while. We don't need to be backing up those things. And then last but not least is, restores can't be performed quickly and can't be performed to different hardware. So from a business continuity standpoint, that makes things really tough. Meaning your server crashes, you need to get a new server, but the server doesn't match the old hardware, so when you do a restore, you got to tweak the heck out of everything to make it work on the new hardware, and that, turns into just a nightmare for us to make happen. And, whoever your service provider is, that's something where it goes from, oh, well, I thought I'd be back up and running in 4 hours, to why am I still down for 2 days and things are still kind of funky and we still don't have security permissions right, and this is missing and that's missing and we can't print and blah, 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 blah. It's because this isn't really a strategy, and this really isn't a safety net. It works well, and, I don't want to give away my age, but, back in the DOS days and back in the early Windows days and back when files that we worked on were, reasonable size, it made sense and it worked, and the technology really wasn't there to offer anything different. But we've come such a long way now between technology, capability, software, and what we're working on, that this traditional backup method really just doesn't cut it anymore. So if you think about what backup to tape looks like, it's slow, the media degrades over time, tapes have a high failure rate, it's costly, adding capacity is difficult and costly, and formats are typically proprietary, which means that we had a client once, and this was probably about 10 years ago. They were on the first floor of an office building, and we got a call from them on Monday morning saying, help, all of our servers were stolen. And we have our tape backups from the middle of last week that we took off site because we hadn't taken off Friday nights, because Friday night was still running. So we have our tape backups, but we need to get everything going. Well, you have to get the exact same tape drive, and you have to get the exact same hardware to get up and going, and that becomes a difficult situation and becomes a crisis. And it's not really a strategy. It's a safety net. It's, hey, we won't completely go out of business, but if you remember those statistics at the beginning, it wasn't so much about going out of business immediately as it was going out of business over time. And so there's a significant impact from this sort of approach. And again, this isn't really an approach. This is really a strategy. This is just a tactic to make sure that you have a copy of your data to some degree. So when you get down to it, here's the problem, is we think a good backup is good enough. In the most simplest terms, and this is probably one of the hardest things that we have as a trusted advisor working with our clients, is getting the point across that more often than not, a good backup is neither, meaning it's not good and it's really not a backup. And I can give you a story, and another story that we had, and it's called our really, really story, where we had a client who was running an Exchange server. They had probably about 50 users on it, and it was a fairly well-known boutique sort of cosmetics company. And for months, we were telling them the server needs to be replaced. The server's on its last leg. You really need to replace it. Something bad's going to happen. Your backup's not really in place for it. We're just backing up the data. And the thing with Exchange is it's because it's a transactional database, which means that it's being written to constantly all the time. It's not like an Excel file or a Word file where one person has it open. There's just a lot of stuff and a lot of complexity to backing that up and ensuring that you have, a really clear picture of it. And so what happened? Well, 3 months later, or 3 months at some point, server crashed. Email was down. It was a crisis. What happened? Well, something on the motherboard blew out. And we had to find a replacement motherboard on eBay because a lot of different reasons, but that was the optimal solution to get it back up and running. And part of it was because the backups weren't good and we couldn't do a really good restore. And that went more towards not what we recommended or not what we wanted to be doing, but more because of the limitations of what the client thought a good backup was good enough. And so, long story short, we had a post-mortem. We got them all back up and going, and it took 3 days. And we actually had 2 guys sleeping on the server floor on cots for 3 days getting this back up and going. And in the post-mortem, the business owner said, well, when you said we really want you to replace it, and you really need to replace it, we didn't really take you seriously. You know, you should have said really. And we would have taken you seriously then. That's our really story. And now, whenever we talk to people about stuff that we really believe in, we actually throw out 3 reallys now. Because, you know, obviously telling somebody, look, you really need to do this, it's still not enough, and still, you know, as the trusted advisor, we take the brunt of the blame for that. So, so when people tell us we can't be down for more than an hour, and we're doing a backup that doesn't include our Active Directory, our security, our information store, or everything else that's going on, and we can't get a complete server image back up and going, we have a really conversation with them at that point. So what makes up a solid backup system? So if you think about it, you know, a really good, solid backup system shouldn't involve people. And it's, dare I say, any good system shouldn't involve people. You know, you need to make sure all the files are backed up, it's automated, it's proven and tested, it includes intraday backups, meaning you're not just backing up once a day, but you're backing up throughout the day. You need to make sure that there's no impact to your day-to-day operations. The restores are fast, and it's being performed automatically off-site. And so, you know, coming from the traditional backup methodology, people tend to think, wow, that's a wish list, that can't be done, or that's way too much to even comprehend that, you know, backup could really do all that, and you know, can be done in such a way that, gee, it makes sense from a value proposition and from a cost perspective. Because sure, who wouldn't want all those things? So then the next level is thinking about, okay, that's local, but you have all this great backup and you got all that stuff going on, and you have a flood, or the building burns down, or somebody steals your server and everything that's going on in there. So again, backup is just a tactic, and disaster recovery is just a tactic, whereas business continuity is the strategy. And so in addition to the on-site backup, you got to take a look at the criteria for an off-site backup, because that's going to add in, you know, tenfold what your coverage is and what you're mitigating of risk. And again, keeping in terms of cost. So for an off-site backup, it's got to be secure. The data that you're storing has to be secure in a place that you know is a SAS 70 compliant data center, that you know where it's stored at, that you have redundancy, that you have some sort of audit that's going on by a third-party audit firm to ensure that your data cannot be accessible, it's not shared on servers with other people, that you can receive and retrieve the data whenever you want. Importantly, that it's geographically separate from you. You know, it's nice to bring your tapes home, but you know, if we have another 1994 earthquake and your home gets red tagged and you got all the tapes in there and your building's red tagged, what does that do for you? So, you know, lastly, we got obviously low cost. It needs to make sense. And then for certain industries, it needs to have some sort of compliance. So for healthcare, for investment counsel firms, for banking, you know, for CPAs, there's got to be some regulatory compliance around all of this. And that's, that's one of our concerns, and one of the big issues out there in just everything that's going on with the cloud these days is, you know, what's the compliance, what's the security, what's your ability to get the information back, what's the encryption level, all that sort of stuff. So now that we've kind of wrapped all this stuff up and said, okay, here's what business continuity looks like, here's what disaster recovery looks like, here's what the foundation of a solid backup approach sounds like, when you're running your business, and as a business owner and as a key decision maker, you know, there are key questions that you got to ask yourself to evaluate risk reward. You know, what risks am I willing to put my business in, and how much is it going to cost, and what's the reward? So, you know, just from a strategic perspective, the things to think about are how much revenue do you generate, what's the business generating, how many employees do you have, how much of that is facilitated or dependent on your IT, how will a failure, even a short-lived one, be perceived by your customers and employees? Again, you have lots of failures. You have these things happen over time and time and time. It's going to have a perception to your customers, and it's going to have a perception to your employees about, you know, how seriously you take IT. And if IT is a pretty serious component of your business, and these days, it's pretty much the most impactful piece of your business. Certainly we have a perception, and maybe it's a little jaded by where we're coming from and what value we bring to the table and what we see as important, but it truly is one of those pieces within your business that crosses all lines of operations, all departments. Everybody touches IT to some degree. So it's now more than ever, it's critical to what's going on out there, and again, part of that is the perception that people have. So, you know, going back to the RTO, your recovery time objective, how quickly can you recover lost files? And the RPO, if your server fails, how long can you be back in running? And if you don't have a backup for a couple of days or a week or longer, what's that going to cost you if you lose all of that? And the thing is again, going back to that slide of, you know, people think a good backup is good, it's rarely the case. And that's where we find these situations that, you know, we're the messenger. We're the ones who have to say, sorry, you know, we talked about this, you've signed off on this, you know what it is, and you've assumed the risk, and here we are. So the big question is, can you survive what's going on out there and what you may be impacted and what your risks may be? So at this point, again, we're going to take a little testing of the waters, and I swear this is the last poll, so I won't bother you again. But which best describes your current business continuity situation? We've got our server images stored in the cloud. We'd be down for an hour maybe. Our backups are taken offsite daily. We'd be down for days. And we don't have a meaningful business continuity approach. We'd be scrambling. Wow. So we actually have some interesting numbers here. So just a couple more seconds. Definitely need that music from Jeopardy. Okay, here we go. So, and the results are, wow. So we have a lot of people who are attending who have their images stored in the cloud, which is really awesome. I mean, that's a great thing to see. On some other ones, we've seen, you know, kind of the opposite in terms of the curve, where server images stored in the cloud is the lowest, backups in the middle, and then we don't have a meaningful business continuity approach is the highest. So it sounds like a lot of people there are pretty well prepared. So this is really great. So the next thing that we want to talk about is how do we address this? So for the 38% of you who don't already have it in the cloud, and possibly for the 62% to reiterate possibly how you have it in the cloud, because there's different answers to that. It might be you're doing backup with Carbonite or Mozy or iBackup or something like that and thinking, okay, I've got it in the cloud, and that, to me, that's in the cloud and that works. And all that is, and not to knock them because they have a place in the whole tactic scheme, but they're a file-based backup. So even if you have all of your stuff in Carbonite or Mozy, getting it down, getting it back onto your server, getting it running again, that could be a 2 or 3 day proposition just to download everything from the cloud. Because one, if you're running Carbonite, Mozy, or iBackup or any of those sorts of solutions, you can't run it from there. You can maybe access files, but if you're running, again, any sort of transactional-based database system, if you're running an accounting package that's transactional-based, an ERP system, a trading system, a portfolio management system, SharePoint, anything like that, those sorts of cloud solutions aren't going to work. They just aren't. And you may think that they're going to have some sort of protection, but they don't. So, so what is the solution? And that's where we've created our recommended backup and disaster recovery solution. So what we've done, we've had this in place for probably about 2.5, 3 years, is come up with a solution that addresses all of the things that we're looking to address. It addresses a local backup, it addresses offsite backup, it addresses server virtualization, which basically means we can take a server. If your server were to crash, we could take a server and have it back up and running within an hour. And sometimes we could have it back up and running in 15 minutes. So the thing is where we're at now with technology, with the capabilities, with the amount of drive space, the speed of hardware, the costs that have come down tremendously, the software that's been leveraged because of all these changes, is we now have a solution that can do all of these things and can do it all in a very cost-effective way. So what does this mean and what does this look like? Well, we put this together based on the needs of our clients. Again, it addresses the 3 main concepts here. It addresses backup, it addresses business recovery, disaster recovery, and it addresses business continuity. It utilizes a NAS device, which is a network-attached storage device, which means it's all hard disk-based. It's no longer tape. There's no longer human interaction. It meets multiple regulatory requirements. And like I said, it's highly, highly cost-effective, and it takes things from a capital expense and moves them into an operating expense, which we've seen from our clients who've taken advantage of this to be a highly advantageous way of going. So at this point, if there aren't any questions yet, I'd like to turn it over to Scott, and Scott's going to talk a little bit more about the actual solution itself, what it means, what it looks like, and talk a little bit about some of our success stories and how we've seen it actually do everything that we're talking about doing here. So it's a pretty cool thing, and I'm going to turn it over to Scott at this point.
All right, thanks, Craig. So to dig a little bit deeper on what Craig was just talking about, there are 3 main components to how the backup and disaster recovery system works. The first component of that, obviously, are the local backups. So the backups that we're taking on a persistent basis, most of them are pretty close to real time. So we can do anywhere from an hour to 15 minutes, kind of depending on the needs of your particular environment. But that again, another sort of benefit over the once-a-day type of system. It performs complete server images. So this is an actual, the whole server, not just backing up pieces or parts of it like Craig was mentioning earlier, but an entire server image that's going to bring you back in the quickest way possible. And again, it's automated. So this just happens in the background. Nobody has to be sitting there making sure that it goes off. That's obviously performed by our NOC. So we have a set of engineers that are dedicated to just making sure that these systems are up and running and that the backups are going off as prescribed. So, another sort of automated element of this. The second component of this is the offsite redundancy. So any of those images that get put into the server go off to the data centers that Craig was just mentioning. So that happens as well as once they're at the data center over here, it also gets replicated off to the data center that's on the East Coast. So in the event of any kind of disaster, we're not going to be crippled because it's only in one spot. Again, that's something that happens in the background without anybody having to do anything. So the third component of this would be the virtualization and bringing things back online in the event that anything happens. So if we just have, a local server that goes down, just say one of your servers goes down, we can connect in there from our office and bring that server back up, and it's completely seamless to the users. They don't even know that it's on the backup system. It just happens. In the event of a catastrophic loss where the building is no longer there or accessible, those images can actually be brought up out in the cloud at the data center. So you would have access to your information as it was at the last backup in the cloud. So that's a pretty cool, feature that it offers that really just sets it apart. And something that we've actually done for some of our clients that we wanted to talk about as well is that we've actually done run-throughs of this where we have set the environment up in the cloud. They've used their terminal server access to get into the environment, and we've done a full demonstration for them so they know exactly how the system works, how it would look if they ever had to, if there was ever an earthquake and they couldn't get into their building, how they could access and run their business from this environment. So that's really, as far as the true business continuity aspect of it, that's, where the value is really there. So it looks like we have a question over here. Can QuickBooks be backed up? Can applications like QuickBooks be backed up? So the answer to that is yes. It's really anything, the way your system sits right now is exactly how it's going to look out in the cloud. There are no changes to it. So it's a mirror image. So that's a really good point there. It's exactly the way that it was, before there was a disaster. It's what we call a bit level backup. So it just supersedes any of those types of questions or things that get caught up in the traditional backup. So just briefly to kind of go over how this works, to take a look at this, you can see your, that'd be you, the client site there with your email server, SQL, the types of servers you'd have there. Our device would sit on site, make copies of those, and then also send those copies off to both of the data centers, and our network operations center is monitoring that process to ensure that it happens at all times. So anytime we get any kind of bump in the road about any kind of backup, we go in there, let you know, address it, and then we move on. So it's a pretty efficient system. We wanted to talk a little bit just about some of our clients that we've had some success stories with. So we've been fortunate enough to see how well this works, as much as that can be very painful for our clients, but it does, like we've been saying, it does happen. So to see the success stories, it's pretty cool. Recently, we had a new client that just joined FPA in 2012, Gould Asset Management, and they had just, the first thing they did was they came to us and said, we really need to take a look at our business continuity, our disaster recovery, because we think ours needs, a little bit of help. So we went in there and took a look at their systems, and we implemented our BDR solution. And it wasn't much more than maybe 2 or 3 weeks after that, there was a flood in their office. A pipe bursted in the ceiling above in a bathroom they didn't even know was closed, and it ended up pouring water all over their servers. So our Network Operations Center jumped into action. They saw that there was an issue out there, and we were able to alert upper management that they needed to go out there and take a look at what was going on. So we actually kind of helped them find out that there was a flood going on. They went out there.
Wasn't this, I think this happened on a Friday night?
Yeah, it was on Friday night. Yeah. So we were able to get out there, and within an hour of arriving on site, everything was back up and running again. So this was just, for us, it was a huge success story, and we were really, it was the proof of concept that we could get everything up and going in that, short amount of time frame to allow them to continue on. And obviously, as an investment advisor, this is just critical on so many different facets of their business. So, yeah, we have we have a couple of different sort of case studies and success stories that we've done with the BDR that we're pretty proud of.
Yeah, one that I can touch on, this is Craig again. We probably had, not probably, I know we've had, we have upwards of 50 of these devices out there right now, 50-something. And over the last 2 years or so, we've had 6 instances needing to use them. And, fortunately, knock wood, all 6 came through with flying colors. There were no issues, exactly like it was supposed to happen. But the one that stands out the most to me is this bottom one for Boulevard Management. It's one of our clients. They're a CPA and a business management firm. And literally, right before tax season was about to start, we got a call from them because they're not a managed service client at the moment, but we got a call. Their server was down, and went out, dealt with it, figured out that there's something with the hardware. Server crashed, and luckily they did have a BDR in place. We got them back up and going on the BDR within an hour, and literally they had 35 employees on this company running on the device, on their backups, and they probably were running on the device for about 2 weeks until the new replacement server came in. So, it's a hair slower than what they had out there, and that all depends on the size of the device that you put in there and whatnot. But they were still highly functional. They were running for 2 weeks until they could get the new server in, and it's one of those things that the impact to their business would have been just phenomenal. Would have been huge. So, we see these sorts of case studies all over the place now where it's just kind of a no-brainer at this point, even to the extent, and one of the things is as a, we're resellers for, a number of these vendors. And so we're authorized partners with Microsoft, with SonicWall, with Symantec, with Cisco, you name it. That's what we do. But because of that, we get what's called NFR, not for resale, copies of all this different software. And we actually, we get backup exec. We've had backup exec. We've been running backup exec for years and years and years and years. And then when this solution came out and really became cost effective, it was one of those considerations, because the reality is they don't offer NFR costs for this. They offer, we pretty much have to pay what we have to pay. And as a steward of the company, I have to think about what's the right thing for the company. And so even though we get backup exec for free, even though we get all the tape drives and do all that sort of stuff, it's like this solution works so well that we do it for ourselves, even at the cost that we have to pay, because it's just something that we believe in. So that's kind of some of the success stories that we have at this point in time. And personally, we can talk about them individually if any of you have any questions on that sort of stuff after the fact.
Okay, so really we're going to go back to the question we posed earlier. You know, can you survive? And that's really what we want to drive home here. You know, the image I have inside of my head is the fire trucks are pulling up and people are walking around with the blankets around them, crying, you know, and the next question inside your head is, what am I going to do next? And that really comes back to those three elements of what we're doing with this. You know, what's the backup doing? What's the disaster recovery situation? And what are we going to do for business continuity? So they're just illustrating that point to you of what, you know, obviously what every business owner must know about this so that, you know, as Craig said, the proper stewards of the company. So, okay, so let's get to the bottom line here. This is what we're looking at, you know, as far as what to give everyone kind of an idea what this service looks like. So there are different, obviously, levels depending on how large your infrastructure is and how much data you need to back up. So, you know, the price sort of varies. As a thank you to any of our attendees today, we are extending a special install fee just kind of as a thank you. So there's a little bit of a savings there. And if anybody would like some more information, obviously they can get in touch with either Craig or myself and we can provide that for you. So we're running a little bit behind here, so I want to just cut to the chase here. But bringing it back to our main theme here of what every business must have in place right now to guarantee fast and easy, painless recovery of their data, this is sort of just a brief overview of what the differences are between the two. So obviously with a traditional tape backup, you're just dealing with backup versus our BDR solution, it's backup, disaster recovery, business continuity, cloud accessibility, monitored, and it's very cost effective. So at this point, you know, there are a couple of questions that we had coming in as we were finishing up here, so we can address them now. The first one we got from Joe, can this BDR appliance connected to a hosted site, say like 1-in-1, can it do a backup of that as in addition to already the backup it has going locally?
I think we have to take that off-site because that's pretty technical.
Yeah, we can talk about that. Yeah, kind of off. Yeah, it can be done, but we should just take that one kind of offline here. I'll get back to you on that one. So from Steve, I'm concerned about identity theft. How does your system protect our data?
Well, the data is all encrypted. It's using 256-bit data encryption, and only your system admin and us who are managing it have it. The people at the data centers, they don't have to have passwords, so they can't unencrypt anything. So everything is encrypted, and nobody can see any of that. Hopefully that answers the question, but that certainly from due diligence that we've put in place and from talking to a number of compliance officers and whatnot, that seems to answer the question from a compliance and an SEC perspective. So I believe it addresses most other compliance concerns.
So that does it for our questions. This is Jennifer again, and thank you so much for attending this webinar. If you have any further questions or want more information, don't hesitate to contact Scott or Craig. And thanks so much for hanging in there. I know we went a little over time, but hopefully you got some good, valuable information from it. Thank you.